Mongols versus Khwarezm Empire 1220 AD, the cities that vanished in smoke. You click to witness how entire capitals turn to ash. And that is exactly where we begin. Winter wind scrapes the walls of Otrar. A caravan lies torn open on the snow, its seals ripped, its merchants bound. 3 imperial envoys are dragged before a governor who thinks he cannot be touched. What happens next is a spark that lights a continent. Within a single campaigning year, Bukhara and Samarkand will fall in rapid succession. 2 jewels of the Silk Road swallowed almost without a month between them, and a network of cities that once fed an empire will learn what fear sounds like when hooves roll like thunder past their gates. The dust carries a taste of iron. The banners are black against a pale sky. Somewhere in the distance, 1,000 bows are being strung in the same breath. But the real story is not numbers or names. It is a decision, one insult, that reaches the ears of a man who turns insults into wars. Tonight we follow the letter that crossed the steppe, the hands that tore it, and the riders who carried back an answer carved in silence. There is one choice made in pride that dooms a dynasty, and we will freeze the moment, right before the first gate opens, to ask, did the Sultan still believe the storm would pass? The embers at Otrar the year was 1218. The sun over Central Asia hung pale and distant, filtered through a veil of sand that turned every horizon into gold haze. On the borderlands of empire, the city of Otrar shimmered in the heat, a jewel of trade, a gate between 2 worlds. Caravans from the east creaked into its markets daily, their camels weighed with silk, silver, and rumors from lands most men could not name. Yet on one afternoon, what arrived at Otrar was not trade, it was a test. 500 Mongol merchants, escorted by envoys of the great Khan himself, crossed the Sir Daria under banners of peace. They brought gifts, letters, and a request for friendship. At their head rode a calm, stern man whose duty was to speak for Genghis Khan. The Khwarezm governor Inalchuk watched them enter through the dust. To him they were spies in disguise, too disciplined, too quiet, too well-armed for mere traitors. Pride whispered in his ear, "These are not allies. They are scouts." Suspicion turned to fear, and fear turned to arrogance. He seized the entire caravan, executed some of the merchants, and imprisoned the rest. He sent word to the Sultan of Khwarezm, Muhammad II, claiming he had uncovered a plot to infiltrate his realm. But in truth, he had kindled something far greater than suspicion. That single act, the taking of peaceful envoys, would set fire to an empire larger than his imagination. News traveled fast across the steppe. Within weeks, word reached Karakoram. When the Khan heard of it, the court fell silent. He said nothing for a long time. Then, in that slow, deliberate tone that froze men where they stood, Genghis Khan whispered, "They killed my men." He sent 3 emissaries, 1 Mongol, 2 Muslim, to the Sultan himself, demanding justice. It was not vengeance yet, only the law of steppe diplomacy. But Muhammad, drunk on his own power, saw weakness in the gesture. He ordered the Mongol ambassador executed, and the 2 Muslim envoys shaved and sent back humiliated. In the code of the steppe, this was not an insult. It was an act of war. And here lies the moment that no one in Khwarezm noticed until it was too late, the silence that followed. No response. No messenger. Only the wind. For almost a year, the Sultan heard nothing from the east. He grew certain that his borders were safe, that the Khan had backed down. But beyond those quiet plains in the frozen valleys of Mongolia, a storm was forming. Genghis Khan called his sons, his generals, his engineers, and his horsemen. He spoke of betrayal not as emotion but as strategy. He divided his army into 4 wings, each a self-sufficient force capable of annihilation. He ordered the forges to burn night and day, arrows to be crafted in millions, and maps drawn of every caravan road that led into the Khwarezmian heartland. When the snow melted in spring, the hooves began to move. Most people never knew this detail. Before crossing into enemy land, Genghis Khan stood before the eternal blue sky and swore that for every life taken at Otrar, a city would vanish. He did not shout, he did not rage, he simply declared it. Then, like a tide, the Mongol army poured west. The Sultan's spies saw the smoke before they saw the men. Entire villages emptied overnight. The Mongols came in silence, surrounding Otrar with methodical precision. Inalchuk, the same governor who had started it all, watched from his citadel as tens of thousands of horsemen circled the walls like wolves. He sent for help from the Sultan, confident that reinforcements would arrive. None came. The Sultan was far away, unsure which border would be struck first, so Otrar stood alone. The siege lasted 5 months. Every morning the defenders woke to the sound of drums echoing across the plain, and every night the fires crept closer. The Mongols tunneled under the walls, diverting rivers, poisoning wells, breaking morale not just with force but with time itself. Food ran out. Disease took hold. Still, Inalchuk refused to yield. But fate had something else planned. A betrayal inside the city opened a gate one night, and Mongol units surged through like a flood. The streets of Otrar filled with smoke and screams. Inalchuk fought until his sword broke, retreating to his keep. When he was finally captured, he was brought before the Khan's generals. No words were exchanged. The punishment was old, ritualistic, and unforgettable. He was executed with molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, so he could neither see nor hear his end, and just like that, the city of Otrar, once a thriving hub of merchants and scholars, ceased to exist. Its ruins smoldered for weeks, black against the desert wind. Only vultures and silence remained. But here's the shocking truth most histories skip. This was not revenge alone. It was the beginning of a message. Each city that defied the Mongols would learn what Otrar had learned, one by one, until the empire itself fell under the same shadow. Yet in the ashes of Otrar, something stirred. Among the prisoners marched west a single survivor of the Khwarezm court, one who had seen the face of Genghis Khan and lived to tell it. He carried news to the Sultan that the Mongols were not raiders, but an organized storm with maps, siege engines, and an army that moved like a single organism. Still, the Sultan refused to believe it. He gathered his generals in Gurganj, boasting that the deserts themselves would destroy the invaders before they reached his cities. What happened next? No historian expected. The Mongols split their forces, vanishing into the emptiness of the steppe, only to reappear weeks later at places impossible to predict. Entire garrisons woke to find enemy flags already behind their lines. The Sultan's scouts reported contradictory sightings, north, south, east, all at once. He could not comprehend how a nomadic army could maneuver with such precision. Fear spread faster than news. In the ruins of Otrar, Genghis Khan stood over the riverbank, watching the last smoke drift toward the horizon. His eyes followed the wind westward, toward the cities that still glittered with pride. He spoke quietly to no one in particular. Let them know. This was mercy. And somewhere beyond that horizon, the walls of Bukhara waited, high, proud, and unbroken, its people certain the Khan's fury would stop at the ruins of one city. But they were wrong. For when the Mongols ride, there is no border, only the next gate. And as the dust rose once again, the question that haunted the steppe whispered through every caravan road. If Otrar could burn, what hope did Bukhara have? Bukhara. The door. Unbarred. The wind carried the scent of burnt cedar long before the riders appeared. It whispered through the orchards of Bukhara, bending the branches as if the trees themselves bowed in fear. For weeks, rumors had trickled in. From the east, stories of Otrar's silence, of caravans vanishing, of villages turned to dust. But the people of Bukhara still believed their walls were eternal, stone thicker than a man's height, gates forged from iron, an army sworn to defend them. They believed until the morning the steppe itself moved. At dawn, the horizon darkened, not with storm clouds, but with horsemen. Tens of thousands, their armor dull beneath the winter light, moving like a tide that had no edge. Their banners rose above the dust, black silk snapping against the pale wind. Bukhara's watchmen froze at the sight, because these were not wild raiders. The riders came in perfect order, rank upon rank, as if the earth had learned discipline. Inside the city, merchants abandoned their stalls. The muezzin's calls faltered mid-verse. Children were pulled from the streets. Above it all, the Sultan's garrison commander tried to steady his trembling voice, shouting that the enemy would break against their walls as all invaders had before. But even he felt it, the sense that something far greater than an army was descending on them. When the Mongols reached the outer gate, they did not attack. They encircled, silent, calculating. Then they began to build. The people watched in Disbelief as wooden towers rose out of the plains. Siege engines taller than their minarets assembled in days from the timber brought across hundreds of miles. The air filled with the hammering of mallets and the creak of ropes. Each sound chipped away at the courage inside the walls. For 3 days, Bukhara waited for the assault that didn't come. And that waiting, those endless hours of fear, did more damage than arrows ever could. Every night fires appeared on the plains in careful, deliberate patterns, moving from one end of the horizon to the other. They weren't random camps. They were signals, proof that the Mongols spoke through light and silence. Then, in the fourth dawn, the gates opened from within. It began with a single shout at the northern wall. A section of defenders had vanished overnight. The guards ran to investigate, only to find the gatehouse unguarded. And when they reached it, they realized the locks had been removed, the chains quietly unhooked. Before anyone could react, the doors groaned open, and through them rode a column of Mongol horsemen, straight into the heart of the city. The defenders tried to rally, but confusion tore through their ranks. Some fought in the streets, others fled toward the citadel. Within hours, Bukhara fell, not to brute force, but to betrayal and fear. When Genghis Khan himself entered the city, he did not come roaring on horseback. He rode calmly, surveying the silence that followed the chaos. The streets that once sang, with merchants' cries, were now lined with the dead and the kneeling. He dismounted before the great mosque, its dome still gleaming under the morning sun, and ordered his men to gather the survivors inside. What happened next has been written differently by every chronicler, but all agree on one thing: his words were not shouted. They were measured, cold, and unforgettable. Standing before the terrified citizens, the Khan spoke as though addressing the very stones. "If you had not committed great sins," he said, "God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." Then in silence his soldiers led their horses into the mosque. Saddles and bridles clanged against marble columns. Where prayers once echoed, the sound of hooves now filled the chamber. Bukhara had become a stable for the conquerors. And this is where everything changed. The conquest of Bukhara was not just another victory. It was the moment the world realized the Mongols did not simply win battles. They erased the concept of resistance itself. They spared artisans and scholars, but the soldiers, the wealthy, the proud, they vanished. The Khan sent his engineers westward, his scouts ahead of the army, his message echoing through the deserts. Submission brings life. Defiance brings extinction. Yet amid the smoke and ruin, one man slipped away, a captured courier once loyal to the Sultan. He carried word of the disaster back toward Samarkand. His horse nearly died on the road, but the message reached the Sultan's camp. Bukhara had fallen in 3 days. No wall had stopped them. No army had met them. The Sultan refused to believe it. He accused the messenger of cowardice, of spreading panic. But when his own scouts returned with the same tale, the truth struck him like ice. Still, pride blinded him. He gathered his elite guard, 20,000 strong, the finest cavalry in Khwarezm. "They are many," he said, "but they are barbarians. I will crush them at Samarkand." But fate had something else planned. As the Sultan's army marched east, the Mongols were already there. They had moved faster than any force the world had ever seen, through frost, over rivers, across mountain passes that even traders avoided. They carried no supply trains, no baggage wagons, only what their horses could bear. Every village they passed fed them, willingly or not. Every captured rider became a guide, whether he wished it or not. By the time the Sultan reached the outskirts of Samarkand, the Mongols had already surrounded it. His reinforcements were cut off, his communication lines severed. What he thought would be a defense became a trap, and the trap was already closing. But for now, the smoke from Bukhara still hung in the air, drifting west with the wind. Itirai, ruins of its mosque, a Mongol commander looked up at the dome, its gold tiles glinting faintly through the soot. He smiled and said quietly, "The door is open. And somewhere far beyond, Samarkand waited, its gates high, its walls gleaming like mirrors in the sun, unaware that the same wind carrying the ashes of Bukhara was already touching its towers. Samarkand, crown of the two worlds. Samarkand glittered like a promise under the spring sun. Its turquoise domes caught the light as if the heavens themselves rested upon them. The Sultan's banners waved above the city gates, and from the minarets the muezzin's calls echoed through streets rich with trade and pride. To every man within those walls, Samarkand was not merely a city, it was the heart of civilization, the jewel of Khwarezm, the fortress that would never fall, but pride, once again, was whispering louder than truth. When the survivors of Bukhara staggered into the city, dust-caked, hollow-eyed and broken, they brought warnings of an army that moved like wind and shadow. "They don't fight," one soldier gasped. "They surround. You never see where they come from. You never see where they go." But the Sultan's generals laughed. "They burned a city of merchants, not warriors," one sneered. "Let them come. Samarkand is not Bukhara." And so the city prepared, not in fear but in defiance. The Sultan's elite guard lined the walls, glittering in gold and steel. Elephants were brought to the gates, their tusks wrapped in iron. Engineers filled the armories with stones and pitch. Every man was told that the Mongols would break upon their strength. Then, in the pale dawn of the seventh day, a single rider appeared. He came from the east alone, his horse staggering with exhaustion. When the guards brought him in, he whispered only one thing before collapsing. "They're already here." The Mongols did not approach in one direction, they appeared from all of them. From the north, from the desert, from the river. Their siege lines unfolded in silence like a living ring tightening around the city. Within hours, the smoke of their camps encircled Samarkand like a noose. For 3 days, nothing happened. The city held its breath. The Sultan rode along the walls, showing himself to the men, his armor gleaming, his voice confident. "Look at them," he said. "Dust and leather. We are the empire of scholars and kings. They are wanderers. Their courage will fail before ours." But that night the stars vanished behind clouds, and from the darkness came a sound no one in Samarkand had heard before, the steady creak of engines. Mongol catapults. Stones began to fall upon the city like thunder. Each impact shook the ground, toppling towers and tearing roofs apart. The citizens hid in their cellars praying. And then came something worse: silence. At dawn the bombardment stopped. Smoke drifted between the domes. From the walls the defenders peered into the haze, expecting another wave of stones. Instead they saw movement. Thousands of prisoners from Bukhara driven before Mongol spears, carrying ladders and shields. Their faces were blank, their steps mechanical. The Khwarezmian soldiers hesitated. Could they shoot their own countrymen? That moment of hesitation was all the Mongols needed. From behind the prisoners the storm broke. Arrows darkened the sky. Ladders slammed against the walls, and the earth trembled under the charge. The Sultan's elite cavalry surged out through the gates, trumpets blaring, elephants roaring as they met the tide. Steel clashed with leather, men screamed, and dust swallowed everything. But here's the truth no historian could deny. The Mongols didn't fight like any army the world had seen. When pressed, they melted away. When pursued, they reappeared behind. They rode in small knots, each unit moving as if it shared one mind. By the time the Sultan's cavalry realized they were surrounded, it was too late. From the northern flank, a Mongol division under Jebi Noyan cut off the retreat. From the west, Subatai's archers swept in with precision so perfect that every arrow seemed aimed by fate itself. The elephants panicked under the rain of fire, crushing their own riders as they fled. The walls that were meant to protect became cages, and somewhere amid that chaos the Sultan's confidence cracked. He ordered a retreat, not to rally, but to flee. With a handful of guards, he slipped out through the western gate under the cover of smoke, abandoning his army, his generals, and his city. Those left behind fought without command, and their resistance turned from defense to desperation. When the Mongols broke through, the city's heart surrendered. Genghis Khan entered Samarkand as he had Bukhara, silent, unhurried, almost solemn. He did not burn the libraries. He spared the artisans, the scribes, the astronomers who charted the stars. But the soldiers, the nobles, the men of pride, he gave them to the sword. The treasury was emptied, the armories stripped. And then something strange happened. The Mongol generals found the Sultan's throne room untouched, its doors sealed, its gold untouched by looters. In the center of the hall stood the throne itself, a masterpiece of ivory and gemstones still shining under the morning light. On the seat lay a single ring, the Sultan's, abandoned, forgotten. Genghis Khan looked at it for a long while, then turned away. He said quietly, "He left before the fall. He does not know yet that he has already lost." Most people never knew this detail, that the Sultan was not captured in Samarkand, but fled into the desert, hunted by ghosts he could not see, Mongol detachments that seemed to appear wherever he ran. Each time he thought he had escaped, he found the enemy waiting. The pursuit itself became a legend, a story of pride dissolving into madness. Back in Samarkand, the Khan gave an order that shocked even his own men. The surviving artisans were gathered, fed, and told to rebuild. "You will make this city a memory," he said, "so the world remembers not what it was, but what we made of it." And so, under Mongol command, the rebuilding began, not as restoration but as a monument to power. For months, the city lived in a strange half-life, its streets quiet, its people obedient, its glory dimmed but not gone. Yet even as peace returned, an unease lingered. The Khan was not done. His eyes were already turning south to the deserts where the Sultan's family had fled. To Merv, to Nishapur, to the last bastions of Khwarezmian defiance. But before he rode onward, the Khan climbed the citadel walls one final time. The city spread below him like a broken crown. He said nothing. His face betrayed no satisfaction, no fury, only the stillness of a man who had seen too much death to call it victory. As he turned his horse toward the horizon, the wind rose again, carrying with it the faint, lingering scent of ashes from Otrar and Bukhara. And somewhere beyond that horizon, in the sand-choked valleys near Merv, another city waited. Believing that the Mongols had already spent their fury, they had not. Merv and Nishapur, ashes and echoes by. The time the dust settled over Samarkand, the name Genghis Khan had become a whisper that traveled faster than his armies. In every marketplace and caravan road, stories twisted around his legend. Some called him the wrath of God, others said he was a shadow made flesh. But in the distant cities of Merv and Nishapur, the scholars laughed quietly in their courtyards, dismissing such tales as panic born from distance. They said the deserts between them were protection enough. No army could cross the Karakum. No wind could carry fire that far. They were wrong. The survivors who fled Samarkand came stumbling through the dunes, their lips cracked, their eyes hollow, carrying tales of betrayal, burning, and thunder that fell from the sky. Merv listened, disbelieving. It was a city of poets and mathematicians, a haven of calligraphers and astronomers, a place where books were worth more than swords. Its governor, Malik Shah, stood on the city walls one morning, staring at the horizon. "They cannot come this far," he said to the wind. "The steppe is their mother, not the desert." But even deserts bow to determination. Far beyond his sight, Genghis Khan's forces moved like streams converging into one river. Subutai from the north, Tolui from the east, and Jebi from the south. They met in silence beneath the stars. For months they had mapped the wells, counted the distances, studied the routes of traders who thought no one was watching. When the wind turned cold again, the Mongols crossed the desert that no army was supposed to survive. Merv's watchtowers saw nothing until it was too late. One morning the horizon shimmered and the air itself seemed to tremble. The sun rose red, and from its glare emerged shapes, lines upon lines of riders, their armor dulled by sand, their faces wrapped in cloth. The first arrows came before the alarm bells finished ringing. Panic rippled through the city. The people begged their governor to surrender, but pride and faith chained him to defiance. "This city has never bowed," he declared, "and it will not bow to wanderers." For 6 days, Merv resisted. The walls shook under the Mongol siege engines. The air grew thick with dust and smoke. The defenders fought bravely, but every counterattack met the same invisible trap: feigned retreat, encirclement, slaughter. Then came the 7th day. The gatekeepers woke to silence. No drums, no arrows, no shouting. They looked out from the battlements and saw nothing but the empty plain. The Mongols were gone, or so it seemed. Malik Shah, believing the enemy had retreated, ordered the gates opened for the morning patrol. The first few riders stepped outside. Within moments, arrows hissed from both flanks. The Mongols had been waiting in the hollows of the dunes. The gates wide open became the wound through which the city bled. When the army poured in, Merv's fate was sealed. Every street became a river of chaos. Smoke smothered the sun. The libraries burned so hot that ink melted from the pages. Those who hid behind walls found the walls collapsing. The air was filled not with cries of battle but of disbelief, as if the city itself couldn't accept that it was dying. But here's what most never knew. Genghis Khan did not enter Merv in triumph. He entered in silence, riding through the ash. When the bodies were counted, he ordered that every man who could bear arms be executed. 200,000 by some accounts, more by others. The women and children were spared, taken into custody. The artisans were sent east to rebuild what the Mongols had destroyed elsewhere. What remained of Merv was a skeleton of stone, still standing but hollowed of life. Yet the Khan's eyes were not on Merv anymore. He was already thinking of the city beyond, the one that had dared to kill his son-in-law, Nishapur. When news reached him that one of his generals, Tolui, had lost a beloved brother during the siege there, the Khan's fury became personal. He gave Tolui full command and no restraint. The Mongol host descended upon Nishapur like a sandstorm at night. No warning, no mercy. The defenders fought desperately, led by the scholars who believed that intellect could still defy terror. But intellect cannot stop fire. The Mongols broke through in 3 days. Nishapur's narrow alleys became funnels of death. Once the fighting ended, Tolui gave a single order: every living soul to be killed. Not one spared. The city was erased, its streets turned to dust, its gardens trampled, its wells choked with rubble. For weeks, crows darkened the sky, circling the ruins. But in the midst of all this ruin, a single figure remained, a monk who had hidden among the tombs outside the city. He wrote later that when the wind rose at night, it carried voices, faint and unending, as though the souls of Nishapur whispered their own names so the world would not forget them. The earth itself, he wrote, smelled of sorrow, and yet for all this horror, the Mongol advance did not slow, it accelerated. The road west lay open. The Sultan, now a fugitive, fled across deserts and mountains pursued by shadows. His empire, once stretching from the Indus to the Caspian, was now a map of smoke. But here's the secret that historians often miss. For Genghis Khan, this was not mere destruction. It was design. Each city was a message to the next. He did not want resistance. He wanted surrender. And as word spread of Merv and Nishapur, entire towns began to yield before his riders even appeared. Terror itself became his army. Months later, as the Mongols rode past the blackened remains of Nishapur, Tolui halted to look back once more. The horizon was gray, endless, silent. They will remember this, he said softly, even if no one is left to tell it. The campaign had turned the empire of Khwarezm into a ghost story, but one final city remained. Gurganj, the Sultan's birthplace, his last bastion. It was said to be the richest of them all, its walls thicker than any before, its people fierce and loyal. When Genghis Khan turned his horse toward it, even his generals hesitated. The Oxus River guarded Gurganj like a serpent, its current swift and treacherous. The city was built upon islands of stone, half surrounded by water. No cavalry charge could reach it easily, but the Khan's gaze did not waver. He spoke only once, his words carried by the wind. Then we will make the river bleed. And as the army began its march north across lands that no longer had names, the sky above the Oxus darkened. Gurganj waited behind its shining walls, unaware that the storm coming for it would make all the others look merciful. Gurganj. The river turns red. The Oxus River shimmered under a blood-orange sky, calm and deceitful. To the people of Gurganj, it was life itself, a barrier, a trade route, a promise of safety. They said no army could cross it without drowning, and so they slept behind their shining walls with the arrogance of those who believe water makes them untouchable. But water can also carry death. After the fall of Nishapur, the Mongol horde advanced northward, cutting through what remained of the Khwarezm Empire. Cities surrendered without struggle. Villages emptied before dawn. Only Gurganj stood firm, the last proud jewel of the Sultan's dynasty. It was where the empire had begun, and where, unbeknownst to its people, it would die. The Khan's scouts arrived first, silent as shadows. They studied the river, the bridges, the fords. When they returned, Genghis Khan listened in silence, his expression unreadable. The city was rich, he was told, its markets overflowing, its granaries full, its walls stronger than any before. But it was also crowded, swollen with refugees and soldiers who had nowhere else to run. Inside those walls, desperation and pride brewed together like poison. The Khan raised his gaze to the horizon. Then we will drain the poison. The siege of Gurganj began not with thunder but with stillness. The Mongols surrounded the city from every bank of the Oxus, their campfires stretching for miles. No sound broke the night except the wind over the reeds. Days passed, then weeks. No attack came. Inside the walls, confusion spread. Was the Khan waiting for surrender or for something else? Then, without warning, the river changed color. At dawn, the watchmen on the walls saw it. A dark mass rising on the opposite bank, thousands of men and horses moving toward the water. But they weren't marching. They were building. The Mongols had begun throwing in timber, wagons, even the carcasses of oxen, creating floating bridges that crept across the river like veins of wood and flesh. The defenders unleashed fire arrows, yet the bridges held. By nightfall, the Oxus was no longer a river. It was a road. When the first Mongol cavalry charged across, Gurganj met them with everything it had. Catapults hurled stones that shattered upon impact. Archers loosed arrows until their fingers bled, and boiling oil rained down from the battlements. The first wave fell. The second fell. But the third did not stop. They came on foot, swimming, dragging ropes across the current, fixing them to the walls under cover of darkness. And then, in the midst of chaos, the river itself turned against the city. A Mongol engineer division, unseen by the defenders, had diverted part of the Oxus upstream. The water level dropped. What had been a moat became a shallow plain of mud. Horses could cross. Siege towers rolled forward where boats once sank. By the time the defenders realized what had happened, the Mongols were already beneath the walls. Inside Gurganj, panic tore the city apart. Refugees trampled each other in the narrow streets. The nobles argued over whether to surrender or fight. The governor, Kumar Tegan, swore on his sword that he would die before yielding, but his voice trembled as he spoke. The Sultan, still fleeing across Persia, had sent no aid, no message, no prayer. Gurganj stood alone. For 2 days, the fighting was a blur of smoke and blood. The Mongols advanced inch by inch, burning what they could not breach, filling ditches with corpses to make bridges of flesh, yet the city refused to fall. Even Genghis Khan's generals began to grow restless. Subutai urged a retreat to starve them out, but Tolui wanted destruction, swift and absolute. The Khan said nothing. He simply looked at the river, its flow now sluggish and dark. Then, with a voice as calm as the water, he gave the order. Open it. The engineers cut the dams. The Oxus roared back into its bed with fury. Water crashed through the breaches, sweeping into the lower districts. Houses crumbled, boats shattered, men drowned where they stood. The flood became a weapon, and the city that had trusted the river now drowned in it. When the waters receded, the Mongol cavalry rode over the wreckage like spirits crossing into another world. Gurganj fell on the 7th day. The streets were unrecognizable, half water, half ash. The survivors were dragged into the squares to await judgment. Genghis Khan himself entered the city on horseback, flanked by Tolui and Subutai. He looked upon the ruins without emotion, his eyes scanning the faces of those who remained. You built your walls high, he said, but forgot that rivers flow both ways. And then came the reckoning. The captives were divided, artisans to be spared, soldiers to be executed, nobles to be judged. The number of dead that followed has haunted chronicles for centuries. Some say 70,000, others 500,000. None can agree, but all agree that when the killing ended, Gurganj no longer existed as a city. The Khan ordered it razed, the river redirected over its ruins so that not even the earth would remember where its streets once lay. But amid that devastation, something unexpected occurred. As the Mongol troops began the slaughter, a group of local craftsmen begged for mercy. They offered the Khan a gift, an enormous silver idol hidden beneath the palace. When they brought it forth, gleaming even through the soot, the Khan paused. He ordered it melted. The silver, he said, would fund a monument, not to Gurganj's glory, but to its end. and from that silver his blacksmiths forged thousands of arrowheads. What happened next, one chronicler later wrote, was not war but the burial of an empire, for with Urgench gone, the Khwarezmian state ceased to exist. Its ruler wandered as a ghost in the mountains, hunted by men who did not rest until he vanished into legend. The Silk Road, once flowing with wealth, now lay silent, its cities nothing but skeletons in the sand. Yet even as Genghis Khan's armies withdrew, the steppe winds carried rumors westward, rumors of the survivors who fled across Persia and into the lands beyond the Caspian. Rumors of vengeance rising from exile, and the Khan, though victorious, felt it too, that faint pull toward unfinished business. He stood one last time at the banks of the Oxus, watching the current carry fragments of the city downstream. Bits of roof, shards of pottery, human remains drifting together toward the horizon. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. The river remembers. And far beyond that horizon, new empires stirred, watching the smoke fade, wondering if they were next. For the Mongol horsemen, the West was not the end of the map. It was the beginning of another story.